So today, what happened on the final climb?
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to just kind of do it by myself, you know?
Yeah.
No, Chestnut, do poo-poos.
Is Dave Bransford coming?
Yeah.
Jai, anything?
Like, fuck Ineos, you know what I mean? They always want to ride in front. We're third on GC, we can ride in front.
Welcome back to the Unchained Binge Podcast, everybody. I'm Kaylee Fretz. We're talking episode 5, The Enemy Within.
Dun, dun, dun.
Joining me today, a slightly hungry with a squeaky chair, Kit Nicholson. I'm sorry you didn't get to eat your biscuit.
I'm so sorry. And I'm sorry for the squeak too. I just rocked back in my chair having realised I hadn't eaten the digestive that I'd primed for before the recording, and it's sitting under my nose.
That's why
So
you
it was a
need a
sad squeak.
sports director telling you to eat. That's why they have it in the show, because you forget.
Are we going to have some like low glycogen problems at the end of this episode, do you think?
From me?
Yeah.
Maybe. I'll
Can we
just
be doing a
start
Ben
giggling.
O'Connor down the mic?
I do have a grumbly tummy. Maybe you'll start hearing it. I have some Percy Pigs primed as well, so we're all good.
Phew.
There you go. You can just, I'll go on a nice long rant and you have plenty of time to Percy Pig. Also joining us, Johnny Long. Welcome.
Hello. Not only do I have a Netflix account still, I'm in this episode multiple times, lurking in the background.
Ooh. I saw Ian as well.
Ian's been in a couple.
Yeah, I'm standing next to Ian, but I think behind Rod Ellingworth, so you can't see me.
Ah,
Just
yes.
sad.
He's slightly larger than you.
Oh, well. Yeah, slightly. All right, Kit, episode 5. What's in it?
Well, here we have a very well-named episode, in my opinion, which takes us inside the Ineos Grenadiers. Tom Pidcock is back after his memorable stage win in last year's tour, but he's now a GC hopeful, and he's fighting both with himself and his team, especially when young Spanish teammate Carlos Rodriguez begins to outperform the disgruntled Englishman, much to Pidcock's apparent chagrin.
It's a good episode. I really like this episode.
Yeah.
I know, Johnny, you really like this episode. It's good intra-team drama here. We've got... I also think it's helpful for us anyway, from our perspective watching this, is that when the main character of a particular episode is a native English speaker, because we get all the little little tidbits, you know, like you get the intonation in the voice and all the rest, and really Pidcock is just a fantastic character in this. Let's go through our sort of main characters list. So obviously Tom Pidcock is the big one, as you mentioned in the little intro there, Kit. He won the Alpe d'Huez stage in 2022. He's a huge talent, massive talent, world championships in multiple disciplines, all the rest. And sort of squaring that talent with not having a particularly good Tour de France is really the focus of this entire episode. His director, Steve Cummings, I think is a really interesting character in this, and just comes across really, really well in the show.
So today, what happened on the final climb?
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to just kind of do it by myself, you know?
Yeah. Tom, he likes to do things different. He's obsessed with winning. He's a winner. You do need to have that ruthless streak. It's just how we as a team manage that.
A little bit of background on Cummings. So Cummings actually... how many tour stages did he win? One or two tour stages?
A bunch. Well, more than one, I'm sure.
There was the iconic one that he won when he was in the chase group behind Romain Bardet and Thibaut Pinot. Was it on Bastille Day, or am I making that up? Am I making this too good?
No, it was on
Nelson
Mandela Day.
That was it. And there, Pinot and Bardet are squabbling, and then Cummins just shoots like a rocket straight past them, and Bardet and Pinot go, oh? And then by that point, he's already gone and won the stage, and it was great.
And it's very interesting to put Cummings opposite Pidcock, because Cummings was a rider who never went for GC. He was not interested in that. He was if it was a stage he wasn't interested in, then he sat at the very back of the peloton.
Yeah, you'd see him more than any other rider in the Tour, because he'd just be he's quite a big guy, sat on the back, right on the back, just dangling slightly.
Yeah, he might as well have had earbuds in listening to an audiobook. He really couldn't care less on the stages he wasn't trying to win.
Yeah.
And also, sort of the fact that he ended up in a director's seat is not surprising, because he was always sort of notorious for being very clever tactically. And he's one of those riders who, very much unlike Pidcock, was not necessarily a world beater talent-wise, but had to use his brain to win bike races, and that's what he ended up doing. It was 2 Tour de France stages, one in 2015, one in 2016. And
if he was in a breakaway, this breakaway was going to make it. He was, so 15, 16 is like peak Team Sky dominance, right? He's there as a domestique for his team leader, but he still managed to win a stage each race, and he did it very, very cleverly. And so the fact that he became a director, I don't think is not particularly surprising. His boss, the now former manager of Ineos, and I think that this is context that we can provide for all the listeners out there who maybe are not as tapped in, is Rod Ellingworth. And Rod is, he's the general manager, I think was his title last year, of Ineos. He has since been moved out of that position. In the show, ends up just sort of asking lots of questions and asking his directors things. We'll come back to Rod. Carlos Rodriguez is obviously a big one in this episode. Carlos, a young Spanish rider. Smiles a lot.
And he's just very quiet. And
nice glasses.
Seems kind of shy. Nice glasses. In fact, if you want to know more about Carlos Rodriguez, Jack Haig, who does a podcast with us called The Rest Day, recently interviewed Carlos when they were both up at an altitude camp in Tenerife. So go and check out that episode. Just search The Rest Day wherever you get your podcast. You can pull that one up. We've got Dave Brailsford shows up briefly. Anybody who's following any Manchester United fans out there are going to be familiar with this name now. He shows up and for about 2 days, and they win both stages while he's there. So apparently some sort of magic Dave Brailsford touch. We'll get to that later. And then motorbikes. Who put this on the list? What motorbikes are we meeting, Kit?
Well, we meet the motorbikes that foil Pogacar's chances of winning the stage and taking the yellow jersey. And they are recurring characters, motorbikes. We see them again.
They are.
Where do we want to start? There's so much to unpack.
What's the single?
Crazy.
Yeah. So let's just start with what's the biggest thing we learned out of this episode?
Tom has a very loud inner monologue.
And then he also says that inner monologue out loud.
Well, that's precisely my point.
Okay, let's go round.
It's not inner, it's outer. It's an outer monologue.
Let's go round, because obviously Tom Pidcock's someone we're like aware of, always gives a lot of himself in the media anyway, so we just see more Pidcock. But how has what you saw in this episode changed how you view him? Does it make you understand him more? Is it just more of what you expected that the situation would be?
I think it's roughly what I expected of him, to be perfectly honest. Yeah, I mean, I didn't realize that he would care so much about that sort of like leadership role and essentially just being, known as the leader, right? Like this is essentially an ego thing.
I've won world title in cross and mountain bike and the Olympics. They're the kind of 3 big goals. So I think, I want to win the Tour de France.
I didn't realize that because he's won a lot of different things, and you would think that at some point he would, he'd be able to say like, "Oh, I've won a lot. Time to go help a teammate," right? But he really struggled with that. At the same time, we've seen him be spiky, and we've seen him be like this before, not just sort of in the privacy of a Netflix set, but cooling down after a stage. He'll say some things where you're like, "Oh, all right." Your inner monologue is now an outer monologue, as I was saying. The things that you said the quiet part out loud there, Tom. I'm not sure that you intended to. I'm not sure that you intended to do that. So I wasn't too super surprised by how he was portrayed or who he is. Other than I wasn't quite aware of just how much it meant to him to be the leader of that team and to be given the freedom to do what he wants to do. Which we can talk more about this later, but we got ahead of this year's Tour de France as well. I mean, just last week we had quotes
and ahead of the release
effect.
of the show.
Yeah.
I think it was almost laying the groundwork both for tour selection, but also I think it was explicitly mentioned that that the Unchained documentary kind of brings that tension to light. He wants to, and it's not even necessarily that he wants to be the leader and everyone to work for him. He just wants to have his opportunities. He just wants to, it's his plan to go down, to attack down Duplan and and to go and win a stage. It's like he's just been concocting these ideas in his own head and doesn't necessarily need the help of the team.
Well, there are a few things at play. He's obviously a young prodigy in like the various ways he's raced a bike, and he's been successful at basically all of them, right? He's won mountain bike, cyclocross, one-day race on the road. And so you can understand the level of ambition and talent. He's now, well, I've got to try and win like the biggest one. And that's considerably much harder, I think, to do than everything else he's done up to this point. And you saw that he said after Alpe d'Huez, where he's like, it was after that when he kind of realizes he's capable of it, right? And he's still below the age of 25, I want to say, still a white jersey rider.
Yeah, definitely.
So is that realization that you possibly can do it? You're getting paid like you're one of the riders that can do it, and so now you do have to do it. And then what that chimes in with is that when you're at a team like Ineos that has a lot of money that can pay for it, a lot of riders probably equally as good as you, it's now a fight within the team to make sure you're the top dog, that everyone is rallying around to make you do that, not someone else. Because you see it with them. Michał Kwiatkowski, a former world champion who's won loads of bike races, amazing bike rider. 90% of the time, 95% of the time, he's riding in service to other riders on the team. When any other team, he would be allowed to do whatever he wants and would win a lot more. So you can, especially in a young guy, I think it's probably quite hard to be the best forever until you reach a point. It's like an NFL quarterback who arrives in the NFL. Like, you've been the best for as long as you can remember, and then now suddenly there's a lot of other guys who are just as good as you. And that's not easy, I don't think, to deal with.
I thought it was interesting that Ineos would absolutely not consider a 2-liter approach.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, they have form.
Well, so they've got, first of all, I guess, but a context there is like, there are sort of allegations. I don't know what the right term is for this, but back when Bradley Wiggins won Tour de France, there was quite a bit of chat about how Chris Froome probably could have won that Tour de France. I think that actually ended up not being correct, because if you look at the time trial at the end of that race, Wiggins won that handily, et cetera, et cetera. But Froome basically waited for Wiggins at one of the key mountain stages in that Tour de France, and they still stuck with their one guy. Right? We got 1 leader. You work for him. You wait for him. That's what we do. And they
difference there though was that he was in the yellow jersey, no? So
yeah, the difference is they weren't fighting for third; they were fighting for first, right? So they're setting this thing up. They're setting this thing up in the episode, and right, you've got Carlos Rodriguez and Pidcock, and at one point they're like, at the point at which they go to Pidcock and say, "You need to pull for Carlos."
Then Tom, you have to commit to Carlos. Okay, we spoke about it yesterday. Look after him.
They're only like a minute and a half away from each other on GC, right? They're not that far separated. They are one bad moment in the mountains away from each other. So it would be relatively reasonable to say you both have a free roll, right?
Yeah.
Like let the road decide, let the legs decide, see what happens, right? And that's basically what ended up happening anyway, because that's what Pidcock wanted to do, and he was just not going to listen to anybody. But I was just surprised that they didn't take that tack, because we've seen that from other teams. We've seen other teams come in with, multiple leaders right from the start of the race, right? And Ineos, clearly, it's part of their philosophy that there always has to be one. They had to set forth in the circumstance that Rodriguez needed somebody to pull for him. Pidcock was going to have to do that. Now, in the end, it didn't end up actually happening. But I just found that interesting and sort of indicative of the way that the team operates.
Yeah, confusing. The meeting when they're deciding what their tour strategy is going to be, it looks fake, but on balance, after seeing what happened, maybe that was the meeting where they're just like, sticking your finger up to check the wind while you're indoors. And you're just like, Pidcock, that's the name of someone on our team. Maybe he could be the leader.
It wasn't particularly decisive, was it?
Very odd. And then my favourite bit is when obviously you have the narrative being set of like, oh, we haven't won this year. We usually win.
Success for other teams might be second, third, but for us, it's not enough.
same with every team. Every team's narrative we get introduced to in this whole series is always like we always win all the time, and now we're not winning. It's a disaster. It's like, well, can this all be true at the same time? But then Dave Brailsford appears on the scene in his cool guy shades, saying all of his swear words. We've got a general election coming up in the UK, and I want whoever wins to put a moratorium on a British person ever saying the word motherfucker again, because it just sounds so wrong. It's just so try hard. I hate it.
Is that an Americanism? It must be.
Well, if it's not, it should be.
Is that ours?
I think.
Yeah, I think it might.
Or I think if you're from Eastern Europe, I think you can get away with it as well. But yeah, that moment's great when I think Steve Cummins asks Rod Ellingworth outside the bus.
Is Dave Brailsford coming?
Yeah.
Well, they're both behind masks as well, so
Yeah.
it's so subtle and kind of like can't really let anyone hear this sort of thing. It's brilliant. Like,
Do we
beware.
need to give context on who he is?
I think we need to give context on where Ineos is at in general, right? Because
it speaks
much
to the problems.
much like sort of Great Britain more broadly, really a faded empire, right?
Yeah.
And
God damn it, it hurts when you say it.
And this is a team that won. I can't remember.
Lots.
They won most of the
All of
tours.
them.
What's the total?
They
won most of the Tours de
2014.
France. Yeah, from 2010 to 2018.
2012 to
Uh,
2019. 2012 to
Yeah.
2019
Yeah,
minus
19.
2014.
Yeah.
Right. Anyway, they won for a while. They won every goddamn Tour de France, right? And they now haven't won one in quite some time. And some of that is like we get these occasional shots of Egan Bernal in this series. And they don't really explain who he is or why they keep showing him. He's just sort of like another random rider. But Egan Bernal won the Tour de France.
Yeah.
Let's remind ourselves of that, right? He was the first Colombian rider to ever win the Tour.
He was next up.
He was this phenom. He was next up, right? He was like 21 or 22 years old at the time, and then he ran into the back of a bus on a time trial bike and had massive injuries, and he's still recovering from that, right? That is sort of the very, very quick version of this sort of downfall of an empire, right? Like he was supposed to be next for Ineos, and then he couldn't be next for Ineos, and they have spent a couple of years trying to figure out what is next for them, right? And Pidcock is an option. Carlos Rodriguez is apparently an option, but neither of those options are actually going to win the Tour in all likelihood in anytime soon. Anytime soon, right? In fact, I think Kate, you were the one that identified the Steve Cummings quote that was basically like, "Is this a successful Tour?" He says, "We won 2 stages and we're third overall, but no." Right. And you kind of called bullshit on that, right? Like actually that is a successful Tour for Ineos now. Yeah, it's not a successful Tour for Ineos of the 2010s, but today that's about as good as they could expect. And I think that's the context around which this whole thing, this whole episode sits in that context of where this team is, what it once was, what it wants to be again, and how on earth they get there. And you can kind of see internally that they're struggling with this as well. Like I don't think they really know what success is.
No, I know.
Tour de France.
If you'd looked at the start list for Ineos before last year's Tour, and then by the end that Carlos Rodriguez is in the top 5, you'd think, bloody hell, that's impressive. He's still incredibly young. He's quite recently just won his first World Tour general classification race at Yellow Jersey at Tour de Romandy, and he's doing pretty well by all accounts. But they had Egan Bernal in that team. Obviously, it would have been absolutely out of this world for him to have won the Tour. But they also had Danny Martinez, who's just finished second at the Giro this year. So they had a team. They had a decent team. But yeah, I don't think anyone on that list was expected to even podium, probably. Maybe Danny Martinez, but I think with that team, a top 5 finish is a fantastic result.
The problem is they're owned by Jim Ratcliffe, a petrochemical billionaire who is running various other sort of sporting enterprises into the ground as he rages against the dying of the light. And he spends like £50 million a year on a team that used to win the Tour de France every year, which is why he bought into it, right? After Sky decided to pull out. And they're not doing that. And so it doesn't matter how you can say all you want, oh, we just don't have a Pogacar or a Vingegaard, but that's not really good enough when you're answering to a billionaire who's used to just getting what he wants. And I think it probably also, you have the caveat of the Jiffy Bag stuff and Richard Freeman getting struck off as a doctor and Dave Brailsford having health issues, which also means that he's stepped back from the whole running of it. But there's that Dave Brailsford shaped hole that probably used to get a lot of things done in that team and make the impossible possible through various means, sort of hair dry treatment or Jiffy Bag, that now don't happen, which is hard to do.
The same thing has happened to British cycling.
Yeah, exactly.
In Dave Brailsford's absence. So there is, it's not an overblown statement to say that.
Well, and we have, anecdotes of when things would happen at Ineos that needed fixing. Rod Ellingworth would still have to call up Dave Brailsford, who is he's now just head of Ineos Sport. He's not really involved necessarily in the cycling team that much. He just knows all about it. So to get the money from Jim Ratcliffe or any extra budget they needed to fix things that other teams would just be able to sort, it has to go through him again. So it just shows there's this lingering sort of institutional, I don't know what the word is, just
it's founder syndrome.
Yeah.
So this happens in business somewhat regularly, right? Where you have a founder of a business who then steps sort of off to the side or up somewhere, or maybe they're on the board but they're no longer the CEO or whatever, and they really cannot let go. Right? They find it impossible to fully let go, and so you could blame that, I think, on Brailsford as much as on Rod Ellingworth.
Yeah,
right.
100%.
If because that's being set up by Brailsford, and if Brailsford is requiring that Rod go through him to actually get anything done, then that's just hamstringing Rod Ellingworth from actually doing anything, right? And so there are, I guess, the reason I think that the context of the team is important for understanding this episode is because all this other stuff is Ineos is in a really weird and not great place at the moment. I mean, I mentioned earlier that Rod Ellingworth, who features heavily in this episode, is no longer there, right? He's been moved out. And they're trying to figure out how to set this team back on the right course. And they're trying to figure out how to, build the talent that they need to win the Tour de France. But they're losing young stars left, right, and center, right? And those young stars are going elsewhere because they're looking at other teams and saying, I have a better chance of winning at Visma or at UAE or at wherever. And that wasn't the case for a very long time. For a very long time, if you were an up-and-coming rising star, a 19, 20-year-old future superstar, or even just maybe a future superstar, you went to Sky, right? Yeah. Which is the previous version of Ineos. Just as two sort of a perfect example from the Americans, the young Americans, Joe Dombrowski went straight there, right? He won the Baby Giro, which is the junior Giro d'Italia, went straight to Team Sky because that's where you went if you wanted to win the Tour someday, right? And now, if you want to win the Tour someday, you don't go to Ineos, and so that is their sort of fundamental problem. And what we see is sort of like the outcome of that, or all the sort of chaos behind the scenes. We see that playing out on the road between these two riders. Yes, I think Todd Pidcock is difficult to control. Also, I think if Dave Brailsford's there, he's controlled.
Well, he's inserted himself into the episode. He hasn't been in a bike race. I mean, yeah, okay, he's had health things, sure. But then even a lot of the time it was hiding out from the press asking him about the dodgy doctor stuff. And then suddenly, he's running in between buses to not get found at the Tour, but he's in the whole episode in the team car, squidged someone else out of the way who's supposed to be in that seat. And he's making sure he's playing up for the cameras, and that he will be in the episode when they're victorious. It's like at Paris-Roubaix when Dylan van Baarle won. And then suddenly Dave Brailsford is on the Paris-Roubaix finish line. It's not that doesn't speak to moving on to a new generation that's going to work. And
that is what it is creating a power vacuum until he shows up. Right? There's just this big hole where no one can make a decision and no one can push forward and no one can be bad cop, right? a good leader is good cop and bad cop sometimes, and that's what Dave Brailsford always was. You know, you can, like, I have major issues with Sir Dave, right?
Sir Dave, yeah.
The means by which they won some of those Tours de France are very much in question, right? But if we just sort of take that stuff to the side and just say, was he effective? Unquestionably, right? Unquestionably effective. And so now they don't have that effectiveness. Yeah. I mean, literally, it's almost too perfect that he literally showed up at the race and they won 2 stages, right? Like, it's beyond perfect. After being kind of hapless for the entire beginning of the race, for most of last year's race, other than Pidcock, like, he shows up, they get their shit together, they do it. I'm not drawing a direct line between those 2 points. I think that that's a bit ridiculous, but it's a nice little metaphor for what we're talking about, right? And again, this sort of boils down to this conflict that we see in the show between Pidcock and Carlos Rodriguez. Now, Carlos Rodriguez, I don't know if he's ever had a conflict in his life. Is the general?
He had a bit of a fight with some tarmac once. Quite a bad fight with some tarmac on a corner on a descent. I think it was.
He did lose that, though, I'm assuming.
Yeah, where I was going to suggest when he's trying to get out through the kitchen of his small apartment, when there's a camera,
there's a camera in the
away
way
from his face, and he's like trying to like fill his bottle up or like put his helmet on. You can see he's just so nervous. I was like, this poor guy is just trying to live his life and be a bike rider, and suddenly there's just some hulking cameraman in his little studio.
Okay, so I think we've provided enough kind of context of what's going on behind the scenes with this team, what's going on behind the scenes with some of the main characters on this team. If we're sort of honed back into the actual episode, what are some bits of this episode that we can provide that we can dig into a little bit further? I think that the Morzine stage, which is the stage that Carlos Rodriguez won, of course, that's one where a lot of this sort of comes to a head, right? And there's a bit that I think is maybe some clever editing / maybe misleading editing, Kit.
Yeah. So after the stage, we see Pidcock turn up at the bus and learn that Rodriguez won the stage, and Pidcock had finished 9 minutes later. We then get him warming down, a little bit of chatter.
Fucking dead him on the descent, all the way to the finish.
It's a Carlos one. I was like, right. When I don't have success that I dream of, I just want to kind of be by myself a bit, let it process, sulk for a little bit. I think this year, it just wasn't happening. It just didn't click. I spread myself too thin, try and win a stage and commit to the GC. I was targeting everything, but kind of came away with nothing.
And then we have a bit of an interview, and the snippet we hear is, "It's a shame, really." And then some more words, where he'd planned on attacking. And I think the context is missing there, without knowing absolutely that this is the case. But I'm pretty sure that the context that we're missing is that Pidcock partially being a mountain biker, and there being some great trails around there. He knows Morzine incredibly well. He's been going there with his brother, who's also a cyclist, and his family for a very long time, doing a lot of training around there. So he knows, when he talks in the episode about attacking off the Du Plan, he probably knew the exact strip of road that he was going to attack on. He knows that area incredibly well. He'd earmarked that stage to be one that he was going to try and win. So I think there's some unfortunate, that doesn't do his portrayal any favors to the bystander.
He's not saying it's a shame Carlos Rodriguez won the stage, which is kind of what it sounds like. Yeah. He's saying it's a shame I couldn't do what I planned on doing.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of like it's a key moment in the show, and again a little bit misleading. Like, it's not completely misleading because they're not drawing that direct line, but that's certainly the gist that the editing is providing, right?
Yeah, and knowing that context, the three of us probably are less affected by the portrayal than somebody who doesn't know the race of the team, the rider, all that well.
Yeah,
it could come across quite badly.
I wonder, like, so listeners out there, I'm intrigued to hear how you thought Pidcock came across in this episode. Because again, I think back to what we were discussing right at the beginning of the show, I don't think any of us were particularly surprised by the way he was portrayed. We know that he's this kind of spiky character. We know that he speaks his mind. We also know that he's a very good bike racer. And yeah, I'm intrigued to hear whether the portrayal was more negative, or people found it more negative than we found it for whatever reason.
I'm looking. We're going to be able to ask him in a couple of weeks when we're at this year's 2024 tour, because you know that when we ask him what he thought of his portrayal, he will tell us exactly what he thought, which is kind of. This is why sometimes, like with Ben O'Connor and with Tom Pidcock, when you know the immediate reaction is to be like, oh, like maybe they're not like the perfect human being. It's like they're professional athletes trying to do their job, like, and lots of people are making it difficult for them to achieve exactly what they want to achieve. And I don't want.
They're also in their early 20s.
Yeah, they're like, you know, they're like young kids.
They're 20. They're early 20s males
who haven't been like out in the big world.
Hasn't even fully developed yet.
Yeah, and they've been like riding bikes and doing
25?
little else for like a decade at this point.
And he'd been winning individually too.
Exactly, and I think you know, you don't want to drum it out of people. Like Pidcock's very upfront. He's like, well, I want to win. And you can't really say much about it. It's not like he's saying one thing and doing the other. Like he's pretty consistent in all of his behavior.
Yeah. and I much prefer what we get out of O'Connor and what we get out of Pidcock to the sort of media trained nonsense that we often get elsewhere. Right?
Well, from Vingegaard from the tour, when like he you know, I'm sure there's much more to him than we ever see to be that successful and that good. You know.
Before we get to awards, any Easter eggs in there? Do you guys notice anything funky in this episode? There
was a question actually when Pidcock was warming down, I think on that stage where he's stripped into just like the vest. Actually, also Pidcock, we get a bit of a Wout van Aert moment where he's just got a towel as well, which is just like these cameramen are just really taking a lot of the risks in this series. But his arm is like. It's obviously they've got like the tight jerseys and I assume they're ribbed for aerodynamic purposes, but it looks like borderline uncomfortable. Do you know? Can you explain what that is?
So it's for aerodynamics, and I don't think Pidcock was wearing one on this particular day. They also wear these little sort of like undergarment things that add texture to their particularly like their upper arms and shoulders. I don't think he was wearing one on this stage. I think this is just a very, very tight kit, which is the way that they do it. One of the major differences in terms of like what the speeds that pro cycling was going 20 years ago under all sorts of enhancements,
bells and whistles,
and the fact that it's like pro cycling is often faster now, which, you know, you put those 2 points in isolation and you're like, oh, well, obviously they must still be doping, right? But one of the things that has really, really, really changed is this focus on aerodynamics, and kit in particular, clothing in particular, is massive, absolutely massive. You know, you're talking about like the difference between a sort of flappy jersey and the jerseys that they wear now is roughly the same sort of power output difference as like doping at high speeds, at sort of 50k an hour kind of speeds, right? So that's why those guys are wearing that, and it's why they're so tight, and they're textured. I mean, I guess the technical reason is essentially like it's a laminar flow thing. It's keeping the air attached to your body, the flow attached to your body a bit longer. But that's why it's all aerodynamic stuff. There's a million little things that they're doing, marginal gains that they're doing. I think that actually, maybe we should do this. Maybe Ronan and I should do like a marginal gains of Unchained episodes or something like that. Because there's quite a lot of things that we see in this show that go completely unexplained.
The ice stuff, all of the ice, like either down the jersey or the weird vest things.
Lots of ice. There's a ton of research around like core body temperature, and if your core body temperature goes up even a little tiny bit, you lose a lot of power. And so
that's what happens to me.
Actually, we see this in the tour pretty regularly. Like we'll see, like Romain Bardet has really struggled with high heat days, and you know he'll just on a hot day he'll just be 5% slower than he normally would, and a lot of that is sort of core body temperature related. So you'll see a lot of ice vests and ice. They take like pantyhose and fill them with ice and stick them down the back of their jersey and just let it melt back there, for example?
What we haven't seen yet is they actually have like mini paddling pools in vans, which we've seen like Tadej Pogacar like run off the bike and jump into, because that's one thing. I think it was either this episode or the one before, we finally get like a thermostat on the road showing just how hot it was, which is why we see all of the ice on the riders, because last summer was so hot. It was crazy.
It was really hot. Mm-hmm. It was so hot that I kept selecting must-have air conditioning when I was booking Airbnbs for this year.
It's why in every like background shot I'm in, I'm wearing sunglasses and a cap. I'm like, someone sent it to me and was like, "You just look like a tourist," and I was like, "I know." I'm just there like taking photos, like right in the middle.
Should we just before we get to awards, can we mention the small storyline that we get at the end with Pogacar and the curtailment that the motorbikes provided towards the top of that climb? But
you
also,
can tell that we're kind of working our way toward a big Pogacar Vingegaard episode, aren't we?
Yes, and it's laying the groundwork for that, and showing that they're quite close together, and there were opportunities for Pogacar to do something quite special, and then you get what I think is quite a rare moment of vulnerability from Pogacar. He's like, what do I do now? That was my plan, my plan B already, and I don't have a plan C. It was it was something you don't see often from him. That kind of at a loss for what to do now.
Yeah. Also, when he was still I felt super
place,
good.
Like
he was super good. It's like how good must that be?
He was still within 10, 11 seconds.
10 seconds.
He's very close. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Didn't end up mattering, but we'll get
we'll get to that.
We'll get to that. All right, let's get to our awards for episode 5. We're going to bring back the Golden Razzie Award. This is, of course, the award for the worst acting within the show. With the caveat that we are not going to be handing this out to anybody who is clearly asked to act against their will, because that's not their fault. But anybody who is acting on their own. So specifically, because Johnny, you weren't here when we were explaining this in a previous episode. Specifically, there's like every single episode has this like rider and partner bit. Right?
Like the poo bag moment at the beginning of this episode.
The partner has been, the partner has been asked to like, ask their partner, like, what do you think of this Tour de France? And then they have to answer, and it's just it's not great and very awkward. So anyway, we're ignoring those for the Golden Razzie. So our nominations. Well, Rod Ellingworth.
Yeah, Rod Ellingworth had some unfortunate moments in this episode, I think.
It's got to be Rod.
Yeah, it's definitely got to be Rod. And with the potential double act with Steve Cummings, although he still came across well in that coffee chat that they had talking about Tom Pidcock. But it was that classic kind of, I've got to ask a question to set up this conversation. It was uncomfortable.
Some producer behind the camera is like, ask him XYZ, and then they go do it, and it's a bit awkward.
Yeah.
All right. So congratulations, Rod Ellingworth. You win the Golden Razzie of episode 5. Our melodrama award. We have a couple different options, I think, for the melodrama award. We've got Tom Pidcock, who admits he likes to sulk. We've got Rod Ellingworth once again, and this sort of weirdly managed morning coffee chat thing. The whole like, is Dave Brailsford coming bit?
Oh yeah,
I think is quite melodramatic. And then of course when Dave shows up, we get the like one step removed from the Imperial March, like Darth Vader music. What do you think?
What about when Steve Cummings, after Pidcock's dropped, or no, maybe it's before that, when Carlos Rodriguez just like overtakes Pidcock, and then he turns to the Spanish sports director. I can't say I've ever spoken to him. He might be a coach, and he's like, "Oh, what do you think?" And the Spanish guy is like, "Carlos Rodriguez, I think he's the guy. He's the guy."
Yeah. Well, he might even be the coach brought in with Rodriguez or to support Rodriguez. So it might be incredibly biased.
It's just like he's obviously not been able to you can see with the way he says it so quickly before the conversation turns. He's quickly like, this is my chance to actually say what I think. And I'm desperate for us to stop focusing on these Brits when we've got all these other amazing riders in our team.
This is just a guess, but so that stuff is pulled off those little cameras that are in the corner of the car, right?
Yeah.
They're in there all stage.
Yeah.
So my guess is that they forget they're there. So I tend to believe that the conversations that happen in the front seat of the team car is some of the realist reaction / discussion that we actually get.
Unless Brailsford's there.
Unless Brailsford's there, who's very well aware there's a camera there.
Yeah.
And that's why he's sitting in the seat.
In his nicely pressed white shirt.
I think it's got to be that is Dave Brailsford coming? Like
it was a great.
He's the boogeyman or something.
Yeah. All right. Melodrama Award 2. Steve Cummings. Is Brailsford coming? I like that one.
And Ellingworth's exasperated. From behind the mask.
Smooth Operator Award. I think Carlos Rodriguez comes across pretty well in this show. He just comes across like a teddy bear.
Decent young man.
Just a decent
and a bloody good bike rider.
He would never attack Tom Pidcock. He would just let the road decide.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Smooth Operator.
What about Jai Hindley?
He has already. This would be double nomination.
We didn't actually talk about this.
This is potentially the line of the series where he just says what everyone in the peloton must be thinking every day.
Jai, anything?
Like, fuck Ineos, you know what I mean? They always want to ride in front. We're third on GC. We can ride in front.
So I guess the context here is that in the peloton, like the leaders team, so the higher up you are in the both the social and real hierarchy, the further forward you can ride in the peloton, because the further forward you ride in the peloton, the less likely you are to crash. That's where everybody wants to be. And so there's some sort of like there's some power dynamics that go on. Like if you're a tiny French team, you're not pulling the peloton pretty much anywhere, right? And I guess the context around what Jai is saying, and specifically around the bit about like we can ride in front of them, right, is that Ineos for 10 years rode at the front of the peloton
every day.
Right? They were just every single day. It was so bad, and they're still trying to do that despite the fact that they don't have either of the riders that are going to be winning the race, at this point is Pogacar or Vingegaard, right? And so Jai is saying, well, we can technically they're still ahead. We could do that. Yeah. He's saying we should sit behind UAE and Visma.
Which I think they'll do at this year's tour, to be honest.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I like that a lot. Jai is just a very smooth operator. So do we think Carlos or Jai?
Let's say Carlos, because Jai's already won it. But we got to remember. So
has he?
Carlos, yes, he's won. He has already won it. So give it to Carlos. But Jai is definitely in the running for an overall
smooth operator. Yeah.
Last episode.
Get the yellow jersey for smoothness.
The grand prize. The Paris podium.
By the way, do you guys remember this? That our Mayo Sabla last year in the Tour Dailies. Do you remember who ended up winning that at the end of the race?
Is it? I just assume it's Bauke Mollema every year, to be honest.
No, Ben O'Connor.
Was it?
Yeah.
Oh, thank God we didn't try and involve him in actually awarding him a thing of sand, because I think we would have chucked it in our face.
What we're talking about here is during the Tour Dailies, we have our own made-up competition, which is for the rider who is 1 hour back. The Mayo Sabla is the sand jersey, named after the closest to an hour. Named after just an hourglass, so hence the sand. And we like to have a little fun with this. And I remember discussing at the end of last year's tour whether we should go to O'Connor and tell him that he had won the Mayo Sabla.
We always wanted to do that.
Like he's Aussie, he'll get it. He'll have fun with it, because like a couple years ago, George Bennett won it. Or George Bennett almost won it, and George is fun, and George like pretended to be very honored, and it was great. And now after watching this show, I think we made the right decision in not going to Ben O'Connor and asking if he wanted to, or congratulating him on wearing the Mayo Sabla.
If Pidcock wins it this year, I think we don't give it to him either.
Yeah, you might get punched in the face.
Probably not.
If you can reach.
Not.
Hey, look,
Shit.
small. We've established that he's small.
He is small,
and that helps.
He
It
is
makes him a good bike rider. You know,
That's
he's
true.
Can't be good at everything.
No.
They're pretty much all small.
Yeah.
Like all of them are very small.
Some of them are big.
All right, so the episode award goes to Carlos Rodriguez. Congratulations, Carlos.
Yeah.
We'll keep Jai in our back pocket here for
He's
potentially
in the
overall
virtual lead.
victory.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, Johnny, do you want to do your special award before we get to the JV award?
Yes, just a quick award. One that probably will be lost on American listeners, but it's for the British audience. The opening shot of this episode, or at least one of the opening shots, or like introducing new scene, is a aerial shot of Manchester. It looks like a thriving city, basked in sunshine and sort of get up and go. So I want to award a colour grading award to whoever colour graded that shot of Manchester, because I've never seen Manchester looking like that before. And if you're from Manchester, I'm sorry for the harsh words.
That's some shade.
I think you agree that that's not what your city looks like usually. Looked,
All right, and last but not least, the Jonathan Vaughters Understanding the Assignment Award. I really think that there's only one option this episode.
Yeah. We've spoken about him a lot. Steve Cummings. And it's partly for that quote that we've spoken about at length about the lack of success that they had at the 2023 tour, when in actual fact, it was pretty damn good for them.
I've actually just changed my mind.
Uh-oh. You think of the Spanish car driver?
No.
Brailsford.
Dave Brailsford.
Oof. Yeah, but really?
Dave Brailsford came all the way to the Tour de France to sit in the front seat of a car with a camera pointed at him because he knew that he was going to be on a Netflix show. Come on.
Maybe he'd heard what John Waters had been saying about his former rider.
That's not the assignment. That's his assignment to put himself front and center.
Yeah, but that counts. That counts.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe, yeah.
He understood an assignment.
One thing we didn't touch on was how politely Tom Pidcock managed to ask the cameraman to fuck off when he had to tell Steve Cummings that he thought his plan was stupid.
Well, it was polite,
be an
but
award
within
for
a hoodie.
that?
So
Polite young man award.
He was in a hoodie that was done up, and this in stark contrast to the almost fully naked Wout van Aert. Tom Pidcock was face down with his hood up. So I'm not sure that his body language wasn't exactly.
It's true.
It's probably just because it was a really cold French hotel in the mountains somewhere.
Yeah,
maybe.
It's not the nicest. We touched on hotels, I think, in a previous episode.
But yeah, this episode was unreal.
It
Loved
was great.
it. I could watch a whole
great
series. I could watch a whole 8-parter on this, but I think that's because I've got a morbid fascination with the team.
Ineos. And there's just so much going on behind the scenes with that team, right? Like
the Death Star.
Who
background
doesn't love a little like faded glory kind of narrative, right? It's just fantastic.
Yeah.
All right, so wait, we didn't decide here though. The Jonathan Vaughters Understanding the Assignment Award. Steve Cummings or Brailsford?
I'm gonna back you, Kaylee. Sorry, Kit.
I'll bow to that. I
think Steve Cummings puts up with it, but just because he knows the fight's not worth it, he's like, this is just another piece of bullshit. This bullshit job that I've got to put up with. I've got Brailsford here. I've got Netflix. I've got Tom Pidcock falling out the back of the peloton who says he's going to win the thing. He's like, I've got too much on my plate. I'm just going to go have a coffee with Rod Ellingworth.
An awkward coffee with Rod Ellingworth.
All right.
One of those espressos, he barely even got any coffee in there. Do you see that? He must have messed the machine up.
It was probably take 17 because Rod Ellingworth can't act.
Or they ran out of pods and no one's got the balls to ring up Brailsford to get Big Jim to order anymore.
All right. Congratulations, Dave Brailsford, for winning the Jonathan Vaughters Understanding
He'll be very pleased
Award.
by the
He'll
awards
turn up
name.
to the unveiling of the awards.
Should we get little awards made and we can hand them out when we get to the tour this year?
Oh my god!
Yeah.
Jonathan Vaughters would love
great.
it. Can you imagine? We should at least
get one. We should at least get one for Jonathan Vaughters. We should definitely, because it's named after him, and he's did he win it in episode 1? Is that why we? I think that's.
I mean, he's come across so well in all of this. Like he's every narrative that he's wanted.
Yeah, unless you're Johan Bernil, then you probably disagree with that. But all right, that's it for episode 5. As you can tell, we really liked this one. Next up,
Oh, it gets juicy now, doesn't
I
it?
should really check this before I start
Yeah,
talking.
I haven't got that noted down, the title of the next one, but it's
Domination.
Of course.
Next up, episode 6, Domination. Dun, dun,
Ooh.
dun. I think we can probably guess where this one is going.
well, we were there. I mean, sort of, not really, but
yeah.
we watched
If you had to sort of think back to last year's Tour de France
Yes.
and think about which stage defined domination, I think we're headed for a time trial, my friends.
when it went from being
All right.
really fun to not fun.
To not fun in about 15 minutes. All right. That's it for this episode. We'll be back in a couple days with episode 6. Thanks for joining, everybody. Bye-bye.